On the eve of his execution, with only hours separating him from his final breath, John Carter made a request that stunned the prison guards and left the wardens speechless. He didn't ask for a last meal, a visit from family, or a chance to say goodbye to the world. Instead, he pleaded to see his dog, Max, one last time. The request seemed simple, almost mundane, yet it carried a weight that no one could have anticipated. What unfolded in those final moments would ripple through the lives of everyone involved, altering the course of justice and revealing truths that had long been buried. John had spent the last decade of his life behind bars, convicted of a crime that had torn apart a small community. The details of the case were etched into the public memory: a robbery gone wrong, a life taken, and a man sentenced to death. The evidence had been airtight, the trial swift, and the appeals exhausted. By June 27, 2025, the date of his execution loomed like a shadow over the state penitentiary. Yet, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, John's thoughts weren't on the crime or the punishment. They were on Max, the loyal German shepherd who had been his companion since before the world turned against him. The warden, a stern man named Robert Hayes, received John's request with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. He had seen countless inmates face their final hours, each with their own rituals and regrets. Some prayed, others wrote letters, and a few sat in silence, staring at the walls. But John's request stood out. Hayes knew the rules. Personal visits were restricted, and pets were out of the question. Still, something in John's voice, a quiet desperation, prompted him to consider it. He made a call to the prison chaplain, who suggested that granting the request might offer John a semblance of peace before the end. Reluctantly, Hayes agreed, but only if the logistics could be arranged. Max had been left in the care of John's elderly neighbor, Margaret Ellis, a widow who had taken pity on the dog after John's arrest. Margaret had no children of her own, and Max had become her shadow, following her through the house and sleeping at the foot of her bed. When the prison contacted her, she hesitated. The memories of John were painful. His arrest had shocked the neighborhood, and she had struggled to reconcile the man she knew with the headlines. Yet, she couldn't deny Max's loyalty to John. The dog still perked up at the mention of his name, his ears twitching as if waiting for his master's return. With a heavy heart, Margaret agreed to bring Max to the prison. The journey to the penitentiary was a quiet one. Margaret drove her old sedan, Max panting in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window. She wondered what John would say, what Max would do. The dog had aged in the years since John's imprisonment, his muzzle now gray, his movements slower. Margaret parked outside the prison gates, where a guard escorted her and Max inside. The sterile hallways echoed with their footsteps, and Max's claws clicked against the linoleum floor. When they reached the visitation room, a reinforced glass partition separated John from the outside world. Margaret stood back, holding Max's leash, as the guard opened a small door to allow the dog to approach. John's face lit up the moment he saw Max. The dog bounded forward, his tail wagging furiously, and pressed his nose against the glass. John knelt, his hands trembling as he touched the barrier, wishing he could feel Max's for one last time. Tears welled in his eyes, a rare sight for a man who had maintained his composure through years of legal battles. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I've missed you." Max whimpered, his paws scratching at the glass, as if he too understood the gravity of the moment. The guards watched in silence, their usual stoicism softened by the scene. Margaret stood to the side, her own eyes misty. She had known John as a kind neighbor, someone who mowed her lawn and fixed her leaky faucet. The man behind the glass didn't match the monster the media had painted. She wondered if she had been wrong to believe the stories. As John and Max shared their fleeting reunion, a thought gnawed at her. What if there was more to his story? What if the truth had been overlooked? The warden entered the room, his presence breaking the tender moment. He informed John that their time was nearly up and the execution would proceed as scheduled. John nodded, his gaze lingering on Max. But then, something unexpected happened. Max began to bark, a sharp, insistent sound that filled the room. The dog's behavior was unusual. Margaret had never heard him make such a noise. John's expression shifted, a flicker of urgency crossing his face. He turned to the warden and spoke, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "There's something you need to know," he said. "About the night of the robbery." The warden froze. He had heard countless last-minute confessions, most of them desperate attempts to delay the inevitable. But John's words carried a different tone, one of conviction. He motioned for the guards to step back and leaned closer to the glass. John took a deep breath and began to unravel a story that would change everything. He claimed he hadn't acted alone. The robbery, he said, had been orchestrated by someone else, a man named Daniel Pierce, a local businessman with a reputation for shady dealings. John insisted he had been coerced, forced to take the fall to protect someone he loved. The revelation stunned the room. Margaret gasped, her mind racing back to the trial. She remembered seeing Daniel Pierce in the courtroom, a polished figure who had testified against John. At the time, his words had seemed credible, but now doubt crept in. John explained that Pierce had threatened his sister, Emily, who had been struggling with addiction at the time. To save her, John had agreed to confess, believing the evidence would be enough to secure a lighter sentence. Instead, the prosecution had pushed for the death penalty, and his appeals had failed. Max's barking subsided, as if the dog sensed the shift in the conversation. John's eyes locked with the warden's. "Check the evidence again," he urged. "Look at the security footage from the store. There's a shadow. Someone else was there. I didn't kill anyone." The warden's expression hardened. He knew reopening a case this close to an execution was unprecedented, but John's certainty gave him pause. He ordered the guards to escort Margaret and Max out, promising to review the footage himself. As Margaret left the prison, Max trotting beside her, she felt a mix of hope and fear. She couldn't shake John's words. That night, she dug through old newspaper clippings and court documents she had kept, searching for anything that might corroborate his story. Meanwhile, the warden convened an emergency meeting with the prison's legal team. They pulled the original security footage from the store, grainy images preserved on an outdated system. For years, the focus had been on John, his face captured clearly as he entered the building. But as they scrutinized the tape, a second figure emerged, a shadowy outline moving in the background. The discovery sent shockwaves through the penitentiary. The legal team contacted the district attorney's office, requesting an immediate stay of execution. By morning, the news had leaked, and reporters swarmed the prison gates. John's case, once closed, was now the center of a media frenzy. The warden visited John in his cell, informing him of the development. John's relief was palpable, though he remained cautious. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing me." Investigators descended on the case, re-interviewing witnesses and tracking down Daniel Pierce. The businessman denied any involvement, but inconsistencies in his alibi began to surface. A former employee came forward, claiming Pierce had bragged about framing someone for the robbery. The evidence mounted, and by the end of the week, Pierce was arrested. John's execution was postponed, and a new trial was scheduled. Margaret visited John regularly, bringing Max each time. The dog's presence seemed to give John strength, a reminder of the life he might reclaim. As the trial progressed, the truth emerged in layers. The prosecution's case unraveled, and John's defense presented new evidence, including the security footage and witness testimonies. On a crisp October day, the jury delivered a not guilty verdict. John walked out of the courtroom a free man, Max bounding at his side. The aftermath was bittersweet. John reunited with Emily, who had overcome her addiction during his imprisonment. Margaret became a close friend, her faith in him restored. The case exposed flaws in the justice system, prompting reforms that would prevent similar miscarriages of justice. For John, the ordeal left scars, but also a renewed sense of purpose. He dedicated his life to advocating for the wrongfully convicted, his story a testament to the power of an unlikely ally, his loyal dog, Max. As the years passed, John often reflected on that final request. It had been more than a wish to see Max. It had been a lifeline, a chance to rewrite his fate. The world moved on, but the memory of that night lingered, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change everything.